jug. "It's an uncanny coincidence," said Rushlight, and poured Mr. Brown some lemonade. "But only yesterday I heard about a case that might interest you." Mr. Brown took a sip of his drink and listened to what his host had to tell him. "Over the last couple of weeks I've been taking long walks through the neighbourhood. Roaming the forest after months of dull city life changes you completely. Your spirits," said Rushlight, beating his chest, "return, and you're full of zest. So it was that yesterday I came across a house where a group of animals had gathered. Said house was a beautiful wooden construction, artfully crafted onto a tree trunk. As I found out later, the inhabitants had built it themselves. 2 hedgehogs, with the reputation of being excellent craftsmen. When you see the house, you'll agree that they deserve all the praise they get. Anyway, to find out what the animals were discussing so passionately, I addressed a beaver standing nearby. He explained that the previous night, the Hedgehog brothers, who own the house and the workshop behind it, had been the victims of burglars. It seems that both their tools and the materials they'd been working with were stolen when they left them in the back garden. Apparently not even a tranquil, idyllic place like this is safe from thieves and their kind," concluded Rushlight. Mr. Brown listened attentively, looking into his glass that had now been reduced to 1/3 full. "Maybe you're right, dear friend," he said. "But we shouldn't be too hasty to call this theft." Rushlight refilled his glass as a magpie chattered above, spying on them. "What makes you think this could be anything other than the work of a common thief?" asked Rushlight, intrigued by the thought. "Well, according to your account, not only tools but also materials went missing. A thief only after things of certain value would have taken the tools, but discarded the cheaper materials. In this respect, I think, local burglars wouldn't differ from their city cousins." "You're right," agreed Rushlight, "but the question remains as to who stole the tools and materials, and for what reason." Determined to solve the mystery, Mr. Brown and Rushlight decided to pay the Hedgehog brothers a visit. If this wasn't the work of a common thief, maybe they would find some clue as to the culprit. After finishing the lemonade, Mr. Brown put his case inside the house, but took his umbrella, as heavy rain was forecast for Mousewood any time today. The 2 friends were in luck, and the rain held off. The ground, however, was still soaking wet with the rain of recent days. Whenever they encountered miry passages, Rushlight got through without difficulty, and Mr. Brown appreciated the fact his umbrella could also serve as a walking stick. Accompanied by the scent of earth and moss, the 2 mice walked along the path. The Hedgehog brothers' house was located a few paces from the edge of the forest, and was indeed a remarkable building. It wasn't enormous, not like a castle, but was of modest proportions, built in several layers and stories around the tree trunk. As the pair was looking at the Hedgehog brothers' house from the path, a lizard with a slouch hat emerged from the house next door and joined them. "You want to visit the hedgehogs?" the lizard asked. "Yes, indeed," said Mr. Brown. "Is that their house over there?" "It is, and if I'm not mistaken, they've just had visitors. You should probably go over. It certainly looks like rain," the lizard said, pulling his hat a little deeper over his face. "Are you acquainted with the Hedgehog brothers?" asked Rushlight, leaning on the fence. "Yep, for ages, I might add. They're good neighbours, as everyone will tell you. Both of them are happy to do simple jobs for free, and they're reliable. The only thing is, the noise from all the hammering and sawing is unbearable," the lizard said with a rueful smile. "Yesterday was the first day in weeks I was able to take a nap in the afternoon." "I heard the hedgehog's tools were stolen. That's probably why they couldn't disturb your nap, isn't it?" Rushlight asked. "That's the case. Yesterday morning they were gone," replied the lizard. "Despite the fact that burglary is a very rare occurrence in these parts, you know." The lizard took his leave and went off towards Meadow Pond. Mr. Brown scratched his head, while Rushlight opened the gate leading to the hedgehog's home. Just as the visitors were about to knock at the door, it opened. The Hedgehog brothers were just taking their leave of guests, a lumpy mole lady and her smaller husband, who both wore thick glasses. Mr. Brown and Rushlight stepped aside to let the moles make their exit. "Mr. Rushlight, a pleasure meeting you again," said the corpulent mole lady with a smile. Rushlight, quite the gentleman and a chip off the old block, bowed politely. "How do you know my wife?" asked the male mole, looking reproachfully at Rushlight through his thick spectacles. "Why, Ludwig," his wife exclaimed, dismayed. "We met this nice gentleman at the garden party near Marigold Meadows. He's from the city. He's here on holiday." The mole helplessly hung his head. "Well, I joined you quite late, so it's not surprising you don't remember me," Rushlight tried to help. "Please excuse my inadvertence anyway," replied the short-sighted mole, looking at Mr. Brown in a disoriented fashion. The latter was so amused he completely forgot to introduce himself. "How can I help?" asked one of the Hedgehog brothers. "We were hoping to discuss the disappearance of your tools with you," said Rushlight in a serious tone. The Hedgehog brothers nodded. Every bit of help was much appreciated, since this was already their second day without tools, the second day without work. "You heard about that too?" asked the mole lady, genuinely upset. "Someone took their tools in the middle of the night. They're the most reliable carpenters you'll find. They never forget anything nor leave work undone. And now their tools are gone. And that's not the worst of it. They were working on a new desk for my husband. Ludwig so enjoys writing letters. We'd almost finished the lady's commission, and suddenly our tools and cuts disappeared," sighed the hedgehog with the red dungarees. His brother in the blue dungarees blew his nose loudly into a large handkerchief. Mr. Brown looked at him with interest. The hedgehog blew his nose again and muttered hoarsely, "It's sad that our tools are gone, sure, but I've caught a cold and I've got a temperature." He coughed. Then he coughed again. "Please let us know as soon as you get your tools back," said the mole lady before saying goodbye. "But Lottie, the old desk will do just fine," said her husband as they left the hedgehog's yard, looking up at her insecurely. "And I haven't actually written any letters for quite a while." "I know," she replied, "but just wait till you sit at your new desk. You won't be able to stop writing." The mole sighed quietly. The Hedgehog brothers led Mr. Brown and Rushlight around to their workshop behind the house. "Everything's just like it was the evening before we were burgled," the hedgehog in the red dungarees said. His brother stood a few paces away, giving his cold his full attention. "So you left your tools and the parts for the desk out here when you finished work for the day?" Rushlight asked. "Yep," said the hedgehog, looking around the workshop. It was empty, save for some sawdust on the grass. Mr. Brown looked up to the sky, his gaze following the shifting clouds. "Do you always leave your equipment out in the open like that?" he asked. "No. Usually we put our tools, materials and the like in that store over there. Not because of thieves, but because of the weather, you see. Tools need to be kept dry," the hedgehog explained. "Then why would you have left your gear outside in this weather?" the short mouse asked, lifting his fedora to scratch his head. The ill hedgehog let out a hacking cough. "He forgot." His brother rolled his eyes as if he had already heard the accusation 100 times. "Usually my brother takes care of these things, 'cause I'm absent-minded," he admitted. "In contrast to me, he's quite reliable, but as you can see, he's ill. As he's got this nasty fever, he went to bed early that evening, and I didn't think of putting our gear in the store. Strange thing, if you think about it. The first time we forget to put our stuff away, someone steals everything." Mr. Brown took a good look around the yard. "Tell me, what do you use these other stores for, next to the one where you store your tools?" he asked. "Jars," the hedgehog replied. "We restock our supply a few months before winter and then lock the shelters. It's a long time since anybody's been in them. Luckily, the thief didn't break in there." Indeed. Seems like a remarkable coincidence, some scoundrel picking precisely that evening to go off with your tools, said Rushlight. Don't forget the materials. What would a thief do with the parts of a half-finished desk? Mr. Brown pointed out. Perhaps we're dealing with an inexperienced thief, the hedgehog suggested. He just grabbed everything he could in a rush. Things rarely get stolen around here, so a lack of experience could explain that, don't you think? But a nervous thief would be in a rush. He'd sooner grab something more valuable than your boards. I'm convinced our thief took the materials on purpose. He must have had some special interest in those desk parts and your work, Mr. Brown concluded. The brothers suggested a cup of tea. The ill hedgehog led the way to the living room, staggering slightly from time to time. He seemed a bit dizzy. After going to the kitchen, he returned shortly afterwards and slumped into an armchair. Then he closed his weary eyes, swaying back and forth. You should get some rest, Rushlight said in a worried voice. The hedgehog opened his eyes again, giving him a fatigued blink. I suppose you're right, he said, and then turned to his brother. You heard him. Would you care to put the kettle on? His brother stood up with a smile and went into the kitchen. When Mr. Brown asked about cups, the hedgehog pointed out a cupboard from his armchair. Mr. Brown put 4 cups and saucers on the table. Then he sat back on the couch, which wasn't all that comfortable, since, for obvious reasons, the Hedgehog brothers had no cushions. A few minutes later, the other hedgehog returned from the kitchen. You'd already put some water on to boil, he said to his brother. Had I? He replied. Well, so much the better. The hedgehog poured the tea for his guests and his sick brother, a tasty wild briar tea. Our forest's famous for this, he informed the tourists. If he hadn't been saddened by the loss of his tools, he would probably have added a chuckle. But the brothers found this was no time for joviality. They did nevertheless talk to their guests about the forest, the town, and other things. As the ill hedgehog brother reached for his tea and took a careful sip, his brother said, That's my cup. The sick hedgehog took a closer look. Right, he said. Sorry. Mr. Brown smiled. Might I have a look at the key you used to lock up your store? He asked humbly. Puzzled, the hedgehog brothers looked at each other. What could the mouse possibly want their key for? The ill hedgehog pulled the keychain out of his pocket and handed it over to the still smiling Mr. Brown, who examined it closely. Am I right in assuming that these keys fit the locks on the other storerooms? Where your supplies are stored? He asked. Yeah, that's right, the fit hedgehog confirmed. Mr. Brown went to the living room window and looked into the yard where the storeroom stood. I think I may have just solved this puzzling case, he said. Rushlight and the hedgehogs were astonished when Mr. Brown suggested going out to the yard. Only the ill hedgehog stayed in the living room and watched them through the open window. This is a good example of how even the trickiest cases can be solved over a nice cup of tea, said Mr. Brown. Up in the trees a few sparrows chirped. Then who is the thief? Rushlight asked impatiently. There is no thief, Mr. Brown answered, and there has been no theft. But our stuff disappeared, the hedgehog said. That is beyond doubt. You're right, of course. So it's time to make it reappear, suggested Mr. Brown, and walked over to one of the stores where the jars for the coming winter were kept. He unlocked the door with one of the keys on the keychain and pulled it open. Between jerky and jarred fruit lay the half-finished parts of the desk and the tools. In fact, everything missing since yesterday morning. Rushlight was speechless, as was the hedgehog. How did they get in here? He asked in amazement. Your brother did not, in fact, forget to clear up the workshop and your equipment, Mr. Brown explained. After you finished work, he got up again, went to the yard, and, as reliably as always, put the material into the store. But just as he confused the teacups due to his fever, he also confused the stores. His tracks are clearly visible in the mud if you look out of the window, despite the fact that nobody has been there for weeks. When he had finished storing everything, he locked the door again and forgot he'd ever been there, just as he forgot he'd already boiled the water for our tea. That's why he was as puzzled as everyone else about the disappearance of your tools. Things like this happen when you're running a fever, Mr. Brown concluded. Rushlight slapped him on the back and exclaimed, "What a reliable fellow! He never forgets anything. Sometimes he just can't remember not forgetting." The hedgehog took a hammer out of the shelter, walked to the workshop, and, hiding the hammer behind his back, waved to his brother. "So, what's the news?" the sick hedgehog at the window asked. His brother produced the hammer. "Where'd you find that?" his brother asked, in as much amazement as his sore throat and dizziness would allow. The other hedgehog pointed at the store behind him. "Right where you put it, brother," he said, laughing. "Me?" the other brother asked, thinking hard. "Really? Well, okay." No one took his mistake amiss. If anything, he had once again proved his reliability. And you can't blame somebody for having a cold, now can you? Later, on their way home, Mr. Brown and his friend Rushlight took the time to enjoy the countryside before returning to the forest. Here, on the elevated northern edge of the woods, one could look far into the distance across the fields. The wind hustled big piles of grey clouds through the sky, which, where the sun managed to pierce the thick shroud, cast huge scudding shadows on the fields beneath. Fifth story. Plato's Song. Among the reeds of Meadow Pond sat Plato the frog, enduring the midday heat and the constant buzzing of the gnats. The insects had been in high spirits ever since Plato had told them a few hours earlier that he wouldn't be preying on them, at least until evening, when it got cooler. He was accustomed to feeding on fat flies, but didn't mind giving them a day off as long as they left him alone. In this heat, just the thought of shooting his sticky tongue out of his mouth was exhausting. Plato slipped into the water and relaxed. "Quack," he said contentedly, floating just under the surface of Meadow Pond. Just his head poked out of the water, and he watched opalescent dragonflies wheeling and zooming through the clear sky. With their huge compound eyes, the dragonflies could easily spot Plato, even when he was obscured by the water, so they showed off, flying aerobatics around him. At least that way they wouldn't tempt him to have a nice little snack. It's moments like these, when you should actually be feeling contented, that you realize there is something amiss. While Plato floated like a piece of wood, motionlessly pondering until he bumped into a water lily, his thoughts wandered to music. A long time ago, he had made music with 4 friends, by the pond or in glades, playing sessions which had brought them a certain amount of fame and recognition. Besides Plato the frog, the band consisted of Jonas, an otter from the north and a gifted trumpeter, Nicholas the lizard, an inspiring triangle player, Peter the badger, a master of the harmonica, and last but not least, Anya the mouse, who sang and played the accordion. Their ways had parted long ago after a heated argument, although today nobody could remember what it had been about. At the time, everyone went their separate ways and hadn't played together since. But even today, some forest dwellers remembered the small group of musicians and their sessions. Plato climbed out of the water and sat down cross-legged on top of a lily pad. He wanted to make music again. So why not pay his friends a visit this afternoon to maybe have a jam and relive the good old days? As this thought struck him, Plato sprang up, danced a couple of tap steps, spread out his arms, and exclaimed loudly, "Quack!" It already sounded like part of a song. In a high arc, The frog leapt headfirst into the water and swam back to his house on the opposite bank. A small footbridge led to the water where a rowing boat was moored. Frogs, of course, do not generally need boats, but Plato always had one ready for those guests who weren't too keen on swimming and could thus still enjoy the idyll of Meadow Pond with him. Plato opened his front door, walked down the hall, and climbed the ladder leading to his bedroom. His home clearly marked him out as a music enthusiast. His walls were covered in posters of famous musicians who'd been at their peak decades ago and since fallen into obscurity. Great entertainers from a time when the streets of the big city were filled with infectious rhythms and catchy tunes. Crab Calloway, the singing crustacean, a remarkable band leader in a white suit. The Rat Pack, who were in fact 3 very successful mice, and who cracked jokes together on stage while performing their most enjoyable songs. There was a picture of Maurice Skunk, a charming French singer. Plato even owned a record player and a collection of LPs with his favourite singers. Despite the fact it was still very warm outside, the frog put on a white shirt, black trousers and braces, as he always did when going out to visit friends or family. Even in weather like this, for Plato it was out of the question not to dress in style. Finally, Plato went to the living room and opened the big doors of a huge cupboard. Carefully he took out a case, put it on the table and unlocked it. The case contained Plato's violin, its polished red wood gleaming in the sunlight. He ran his hand over the precious instrument before closing the case and snapping the locks shut. Then the frog left to visit the friends he had lost sight of so long ago. As Plato didn't like walking along gritty paths with his thin-skinned feet, which were more suited to swimming and the living room, he decided to take his bike. He strapped his violin case onto the rack and started pedalling. First on the list to visit was Peter. As far as Plato knew, the badger now owned a bakery and sold pastries on the western outskirts of the forest. The quality of his bread was beyond question, with many customers happily confirming the fact every Sunday when he baked his famous Sunday rolls. Plato rode along the bank of the pond, then turned onto the track that led around Mousewood. The direct route through the forest was shorter, but by bike he'd be quicker if he rode outside the woods. En route he came across 2 humans, who watched the frog pass by with astonishment. "Look, a frog," said one to the other. "They live in ponds and pools and eat insects, I think." Soon the frog reached the western edge of Mousewood, where he got off and pushed his bike along the path, since he wasn't familiar with this part of the woods and didn't know exactly where to find his old friend. In front of a row of houses, 2 grandfatherly squirrels were telling stories of the old days, with a cluster of grand and great-grandchildren playing and laughing around them. When they saw the frog with his bicycle, the children stopped playing to get a closer look at the stranger. The seniors, however, were too busy talking to take any notice. Plato turned to them and cleared his throat. "Grandpa, I think the frog wants something," one of the kids shouted, staring at his grandfather and pointing at the frog. As he couldn't stare at Plato at the same time, the other children took that part. "Yes, what is it?" one of the elderly squirrels asked. "Excuse me," Plato began. "Could you tell me where I can find the local bakery?" "Bakery, the elderly squirrel mused. "Used to be right over there," he said, pointing to the left with his cane. "Then," he continued, "then it moved over there," and he pointed to the right. "Nowadays, though," he concluded, putting his cane back on the ground in front of him, "nowadays they're somewhere else. You'll find bread and pastries over there." Plato turned around. There indeed, with a shop window displaying the finest cakes and rolls, was the bakery. It was full of customers. "Many thanks," Plato said, and pushed his bike over the road. "That frog's got style," said one of the elderly squirrels to the other. Plato's braces obviously recalled his own youth, when the streets of the big city were filled with infectious rhythms and catchy tunes. "He reminds me of someone." The bakery was bustling with activity. The entrance or exit of every customer was faithfully marked by a tiny bell, and made no exception for our frog. Inside, the smell of freshly baked wares filled the air. Cakes and bread, but also rolls and cookies. Behind the counter, a badger attended to customer after customer. Plato wasn't sure how he should ask about Peter, and decided to join the short queue. A few minutes passed, accompanied by the bell's clear ring when the door opened or closed, and the sale of blueberry cake, cheese sandwiches, and coarse wholemeal and poppy seed bread. Eventually it was Plato's turn, and, since he wasn't an ordinary customer, he tried not to confuse the baker too much. I am an old acquaintance of Peter's. I hope this is the right place to look for him," he said. "It certainly is," the badger lady replied. "I'm his sister. I'm just helping out. He's moving in with his wife, you know. That's why he's not here right now." "I see," said Plato thoughtfully. "Unfortunately, I can't reach him at the moment either. Would you like to leave a message?" the badger lady asked helpfully. "Just send him my best wishes, please. Best wishes from Plato the frog. I'd like to make music with him again." "Plato, I've heard of you. He'll be happy to see you again," she said. "Here, have a few of our fresh cookies. On the house," she added with a twinkle. "Thanks," said Plato. "I'm sure they're delicious." An elderly mouse behind him elbowed her way to the front of the queue and said, "Yes, we all think they're delicious. So it would be most kind if you would let the rest of us buy some as well." Plato was tempted to complain about the mouse's rude manner, but then remembered he wasn't an ordinary customer. So he left the shop, and the soft ring of the bell bade him farewell. The frog picked up his bike, brooding. There were still 3 music acquaintances from the old days left to visit: Anya the mouse, Nicholas the lizard, and Jonas the otter. Plato strapped the cookies on the rack of his bike next to his violin case and rode off. "He seems somehow familiar," said the elderly squirrel with the cane as he watched the frog disappear. "You're probably confusing him, old chap," his equally elderly friend replied. "And if I am, then it's my business," said the other squirrel. He swung his cane through the air, pointed it towards the bakery, and shuffled, surprisingly quickly, across the road. Entering the shop, the squirrel had a look round. When he saw the badger lady behind the counter, he elbowed his way to the front, ignoring the numerous cries of, "How dare you! Intolerable! What appalling manners!" He wasn't that bothered. A squirrel of his age can do pretty well as he pleases. "Excuse me, but who was that sprucely dressed frog who was here a minute ago?" the old fellow asked the badger. "That was Plato the musician," she replied. "Plato, of course!" the squirrel exclaimed, smacking his paw against his forehead, angry that this hadn't occurred to him earlier. Behind the still irritated customers, yet another person shoved their way through to the front. This time it was Peter the baker, carrying a large box and wheezing, "Plato the frog?" Plato let the cool breeze play around his green head as he rode past fields and meadows and a group of mice and squirrels on a hiking trip. Eventually he reached an avenue of old trees offering much-needed shade. The frog dismounted and had a look round. Jonas the otter lived near the avenue, close to a small stream, so Plato left his bike at the track and walked down a narrow path leading to his friend's house. There he knocked on the front door. No one answered. There was no one home. Disappointed by his run of bad luck, Plato strolled back up to the avenue and decided to take a break from his roaming around. At that moment a gentle melody wafted down to him. It was a robin, high in the treetops, and its song was so lovely, Plato stopped to listen. A few minutes later, the robin